a widow alone with her son, a wounded Comanche warrior at her door, and a deadly enemy approaching with the dawn. What choice would you make when survival demands trust in the most unlikely of strangers? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The harsh winter winds howled across the Montana Territory of 1876, sweeping over the small settlement of Pinecrest. Sarah Caldwell stood at the window of her modest cabin, watching snowflakes dance in the fading light. 6 months had passed since her husband Thomas had been taken by typhoid, leaving her alone with their 7-year-old son, James. The homestead felt emptier with each passing day, the bitter cold seeping into her bones, much like the loneliness that had taken residence in her heart. James slept soundly in the small bedroom they now shared, his peaceful breathing a stark contrast to the violent storm brewing outside. Sarah wrapped her shawl tight around her shoulders, her gaze lingering on the edge of their property where the wilderness began. The Blackfoot Territory lay beyond, and though relations had been peaceful for some time, rumors of skirmishes with both settlers and Comanche warriors had reached Pinecrest in recent weeks. The crack of a breaking branch snapped Sarah from her thoughts. She squinted through the frosted glass, her heart hammering against her ribs as she made out a shadowy figure approaching through the blizzard. Not the hulking frame of a bear, but the unmistakable silhouette of a man, moving with difficulty against the driving snow. Sarah reached for Thomas's rifle above the fireplace, loading it with practiced hands. She positioned herself beside the door, weapon raised, as 3 firm knocks echoed through the cabin. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "I mean no harm," came a deep accented voice. "I seek shelter from the storm." Sarah hesitated. "State your business, stranger." "Your child needs protection, and I need shelter," the voice replied. "The Blackfoot warriors pursue me. They will come by morning." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She cracked the door open, rifle still aimed, and found herself face to face with a tall Comanche man. Blood trickled from a wound on his temple, and his dark eyes held equal measures of pride and desperation. A bow and quiver hung across his back, and a knife was sheathed at his side. "My name is Takiom," he said. "I am far from my people's lands. The Blackfoot hunt me for crossing their territory. If they find me, they will not spare this cabin or those within." Sarah's finger tensed on the trigger. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I could have taken this cabin while you slept," he answered simply. "Instead, I knock and ask for shelter. One night. Then I continue my journey." The wind howled louder, bringing a fresh surge of snow. Sarah studied the man's face, searching for deceit, but finding only exhaustion and determination. Her son's safety was her priority, and if what this stranger said was true, turning him away might bring greater danger. "One night," she finally agreed, stepping aside. "But the rifle stays with me." Takiom nodded and entered, moving with the silent grace of a hunter despite his apparent fatigue. Sarah closed the door against the storm, wondering if she had just made a terrible mistake or a decision that might save their lives. "Why do the Blackfoot hunt you?" she asked, keeping distance between them. Takiom removed his snow-covered buffalo hide coat, revealing several more wounds that had soaked through his buckskin shirt. "I killed 3 of their warriors who attacked my small hunting party. My brothers did not survive." Sarah's grip tightened on the rifle. "And now you've brought their vengeance to my doorstep." "I brought warning," he corrected, his dark eyes meeting hers, "and knowledge of how to defend against them. Without me, you would have no preparation for what comes with the dawn." The cabin fell silent save for the crackling fire and the storm's rage. Sarah weighed her options, each seeming more impossible than the last. To turn him out would be a death sentence in this blizzard, yet harboring him could mean danger for James. "Mama?" A small voice broke the tension as James appeared in the bedroom doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Who's talking?" Sarah lowered the rifle slightly. "Go back to bed, James." The boy's eyes widened at the sight of Takiom, not with fear but with the unbridled curiosity of childhood. "Are you an Indian?" Like in Paz books, Takeyome's stern expression softened momentarily. I am Comanche, the people. James bed. Now, Sarah ordered more firmly. But Ma, now son. James reluctantly retreated, though Sarah knew he would be listening from behind the door. She turned back to Takeyome, who had made no move toward her or her son. You're bleeding, she observed. It will heal or it won't, he replied stoically. Sarah sighed, setting the rifle aside, but within reach. I have supplies. If you're to help us against these Blackfoot, you'll need your strength. As she gathered her meager medical supplies, Sarah could feel Takeyome watching her, assessing her just as carefully as she had him. The storm raged on outside, a fitting backdrop to the tumultuous thoughts racing through her mind. By morning, they would either stand together against a common threat or discover this strange alliance was built on lies. Either way, Sarah knew with bone-deep certainty that tomorrow would change everything. Dawn broke over Pinecrest with eerie stillness, the storm having yielded to a crystalline silence that seemed to hold its breath. Sarah had slept little, keeping vigil in her rocking chair while Takeyome sat cross-legged by the window, his eyes never leaving the tree line. The bandages she'd applied to his wounds stood out starkly against his copper skin. They will come as the sun rises fully, Takeyome said, his voice startling in the quiet. 3, perhaps 4 warriors. They will expect me alone and weakened. Sarah checked Thomas's rifle again, more for comfort than necessity. What makes you so valuable that they'd track you through a blizzard? A ghost of a smile crossed Takeyome's face. Not value, honor. I killed their war chief's son. Lord have mercy, Sarah whispered. She glanced toward the bedroom where James still slept. We should flee. The snow is deep. We would leave tracks. Better to make a stand here. Takeyome stood, moving to his belongings. He withdrew something wrapped in leather, a second knife, which he offered to Sarah, handle first. Do you know how to use this? Sarah accepted it, feeling the unfamiliar weight. If it comes to that. It may, he replied simply. Your rifle has distance. The knife is for when they get close. The matter-of-fact way he spoke of violence sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. This was the reality of frontier life, one she'd been fortunate enough to avoid until now. I'll wake James, she said. There's a root cellar beneath the floor. He'll be safer there. Takeyome nodded. A wise decision. When Sarah returned with a sleepy, confused James, Takeyome had positioned himself by the window again, bow now strung and an arrow knocked loosely. Remember what I told you, Sarah said, kneeling before her son at the trapdoor to the cellar. Stay quiet, no matter what you hear. Don't come up until I call for you. But Ma, I want to help, James protested, his small face set in determination so like his father's that it made Sarah's heart ache. You help by staying safe, she insisted, pressing a kiss to his forehead. That's what your pa would want. With reluctance, James descended the ladder. Sarah closed the trapdoor, sliding a small shelf over it for good measure. When she looked up, Takeyome was watching her with an unreadable expression. Your son has a warrior's spirit, he observed. He has his father's stubbornness, Sarah replied. She took position at the second window, rifle at the ready. How will they come? From the trees, Takeyome indicated with a slight nod. They will try to surround the cabin. The minutes stretched into an hour, the tension in the cabin growing with each passing moment. Sarah's shoulders ached from holding the rifle, but she dared not relax her vigilance. Takeyome remained perfectly still, only his eyes moving as they scanned the landscape. Then, so subtly she might have missed it, Takeyome tensed. There, he whispered. Sarah followed his gaze to a barely perceptible movement among the pines. A flash of color, perhaps a feather or painted symbol, quickly vanished behind a trunk. I see only one, she murmured. The others circle, Takeyome replied. When the leader signals, they will charge together. Sarah's mouth went dry. How do we stop them? We must kill the leader first. Takeyome drew his bowstring tighter. The others may retreat if he falls. The brutal simplicity of his strategy left no room for negotiation or mercy. This was survival in its rawest form. A bird call echoed through the clearing, not a natural sound, but a signal. Takayom released his arrow in a fluid motion. It sailed through the air, followed by a strangled cry from the trees. A Blackfoot warrior staggered into view, Takayom's arrow protruding from his shoulder. "Now they know we are prepared," Takayom said, already knocking another arrow. The wounded leader shouted commands in his native tongue, and suddenly the clearing erupted in movement. 2 more warriors emerged from different directions, rushing toward the cabin with war axes raised. The one on the left, Takayom directed calmly. Sarah aimed and fired. The rifle's report was deafening in the small cabin. Her target stumbled but kept coming. She frantically began reloading, her fingers clumsy with fear. Takayom's second arrow found its mark in the chest of the warrior on the right, dropping him to the snow. The leader and remaining warrior reached the cabin, one attacking the door while the other tried to break through a window. The window frame splintered as a war axe smashed against it. Sarah abandoned the half-loaded rifle and drew the knife Takayom had given her. The warrior's fierce face appeared at the broken window, his dark eyes locking with hers in a moment of primal confrontation. She slashed forward as he tried to climb through, catching him across the forearm. He howled in pain but grabbed her wrist, his strength overwhelming. Sarah struggled, her free hand searching desperately for anything to use as a weapon. A blur of movement caught her peripheral vision as Takayom intercepted the warrior, driving his own knife deep into the man's side. The Blackfoot's grip on Sarah loosened, and she stumbled backward, gasping for breath. The door burst open, the wounded leader charging in with murderous intent. Takayom met him head-on, the 2 men crashing against the table in a desperate struggle. Sarah recovered her knife, circling the fighting men, searching for an opening to help. The Blackfoot leader was bleeding from Takayom's arrow wound, but fought with the strength of vengeance. He slammed Takayom against the wall, hands closing around the Comanche's throat. Takayom's face contorted as he fought for air, his fingers clawing at his opponent's grip. Sarah lunged forward, driving her knife into the back of the Blackfoot's thigh. He roared in pain, releasing Takayom to swing at her. She ducked beneath his arm, scrambling away as Takayom recovered and tackled the man to the ground. The struggle was brutal and swift. Takayom pinned the leader, speaking rapid words in what Sarah assumed was the Blackfoot language. The warrior responded with defiance, spitting words back at him. Then, with grim finality, Takayom ended the fight with a single decisive strike. Silence descended on the cabin once more, now heavy with the aftermath of violence. Sarah stood trembling, knife still clutched in her bloodied hand. Outside, the pristine snow was stained crimson in multiple places. "It is done," Takayom said, rising slowly. He too was bloodied, a fresh cut across his cheekbone adding to his collection of wounds. "Are there more?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Takayom shook his head. "No, but we must move the bodies before your son sees them." The practicality of his words snapped Sarah back to herself. James. In the heat of battle, she'd almost forgotten he was hiding below. She rushed to the trapdoor, calling out to him. "James? It's safe now, you can come up." Her son emerged, wide-eyed and pale but unharmed. Sarah pulled him into a fierce embrace, her body still trembling with fading adrenaline. Over James's shoulder, she met Takayom's gaze. The Comanche warrior inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect that transcended the vast differences between them. In this moment, they were not settler and Indian, white woman and Comanche. They were simply survivors of a shared ordeal. And as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the blood-stained snow, Sarah knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The day after the attack dawned clear and cold, the brilliant sunshine making the bloodstains in the snow appear all the more stark. Sarah stood on the porch, watching as Takayom finished burying the last of the Blackfoot warriors beneath a cairn of stones at the edge of the property. He had insisted on giving them proper burial, explaining that to leave them exposed would dishonor both the dead and the living. James sat on the steps beside her, uncharacteristically quiet. The boy had helped by gathering smaller stones, seemingly processing the violence he'd narrowly avoided witnessing through this act of somber construction. "Why is he burying the men who tried to kill us, Ma?" James finally asked. Sarah placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "Because respect for the dead is something all people share, regardless of where they come from." Takayom approached, wiping his hands on his buckskins. The morning's exertion had reopened one of his wounds, a thin line of blood seeping through the bandage on his arm. "Your bandage needs changing," Sarah observed. Takayom glanced down as if noticing the blood for the first time. "It can wait. We must discuss what comes next." Sarah ushered James inside, setting him up with his slate and chalk before rejoining Takayom at the table. The Comanche warrior had spread out a rough map he'd drawn on a piece of parchment. "The Blackfoot will send more warriors when these do not return," he stated matter-of-factly. "Perhaps not today, but soon. Their territory extends here," he traced an area with his finger, "and their main camp lies 2 days' ride to the north." Sarah studied the crude map, anxiety building in her chest. How many would come next time? Many, too many to fight. Takayom's expression remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed concern. "You cannot stay here." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, though she had already suspected this truth. This cabin represented everything she and Thomas had worked for, their dreams, their future. To abandon it seemed unthinkable, yet to remain would be foolish. "Where would we go?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Pinecrest is 2 days' journey by wagon in good weather." "In this snow ... Go quotes. Not Pinecrest," Takayom interrupted. "The settlement would be the first place they would look. There's a trapper's cabin 1 day's ride east. It sits in a valley, well hidden. You could shelter there until it is safe to return." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "How do you know of this cabin?" A hint of amusement crossed Takayom's face. "I have traveled these lands for many seasons. I know where your people build their homes. And you would lead us there?" Sarah couldn't keep the suspicion from her voice. After all they'd been through, a part of her still questioned his motives. Takayom met her gaze directly. "I owe you a life debt. You gave me shelter when I had none. We fought together against a common enemy. Among my people, such bonds are sacred." Sarah considered his words. The idea of traveling through the wilderness with this man she barely knew was unsettling, yet she had already trusted him with her life and her son's. And what choice did she truly have? "When would we leave?" she asked. "Tomorrow at first light. Tonight we prepare." The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Sarah packed only what was essential: food, clothing, Thomas's rifle and ammunition. A few precious mementos she couldn't bear to leave behind. Takayom fashioned a small travois that could be pulled behind her horse, allowing them to transport more supplies than would otherwise be possible. As evening fell, Sarah put James to bed in his small room, promising adventures ahead to ease his anxiety about leaving home. When she returned to the main room, she found Takayom staring into the fire, his expression distant. "You're thinking of your brothers," she said softly, taking a seat across from him. "The ones who died." Takayom's gaze remained fixed on the flames. "They were good men, brave hunters. We journeyed north to trade with the Crow when the Blackfoot ambushed us." He paused, then added, "Makia was to be married upon our return. His woman will now weep instead of celebrate." The simple statement carried such weight of grief that Sarah felt her throat tighten. She understood loss all too well. "I lost my husband to fever last spring," she offered. "Sometimes I still turn to tell him something before remembering he's gone." Takayom nodded. "The dead walk beside us always." They sat in companionable silence for a time, the fire crackling between them. Sarah found herself studying his profile, the proud set of his jaw, the straight nose, the small scars that told of a life lived in constant struggle and survival. He was nothing like the savage Indians described in penny dreadfuls or the newspapers. There was a dignity to him, a code of honor as rigid as any white man's. "Why were you so far from your people's lands?" she finally asked. "The Comanche territories are far south of here." A shadow passed over Takeyomi's features. "My band was scattered by the Bluecoats. Many were forced onto the reservation at Fort Sill. I refused to surrender my freedom." His hands clenched briefly. "I hunt and trade, moving always. Someday I hope to find others of my band who still live free." Sarah absorbed this information, trying to imagine such a life of perpetual movement and uncertainty. "And after you've fulfilled this life debt to us, what then?" "I continue my journey," he replied simply. "Perhaps south, toward the mountains where winter is less harsh." The thought of him leaving brought an unexpected pang. In the span of just 2 days, this stranger had become someone she relied upon, someone who understood the precarious nature of her existence in a way few others could. "James has taken a liking to you," she said, changing the subject. "He's never met an Indian before, only read about them in his father's books." A rare smile ghosted across Takeyomi's lips. "He asks many questions. He has a good mind." "Too curious for his own good sometimes," Sarah smiled fondly. Thomas always said his questions would either make him a great scholar or get him into terrible trouble. "Sometimes they are the same thing," Takeyomi observed, and Sarah found herself laughing softly at the unexpected wisdom. The moment of lightness faded as Takeyomi returned to the practicalities of their situation. "We should sleep. Tomorrow will be difficult. The snow is deep, and we must move quickly." Sarah nodded, rising from her chair. "You can take Thomas's bed tonight." "It's only right, considering ... double quotes." Takeyomi shook his head firmly. "I will keep watch. Sleep with your son. I will wake you before dawn." She wanted to argue that he needed rest to heal, but the resolve in his eyes told her it would be futile. Instead, she gathered an extra blanket and handed it to him. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing the words were inadequate for all he had done. Takeyomi accepted the blanket with a slight nod. As Sarah turned to go, he spoke again. "Sarah Caldwell," he said, using her full name for the first time. "You fought well today. Your husband would be proud." The unexpected praise brought a warmth to her cheeks and a tightness to her throat. Without trusting herself to respond, Sarah retreated to the bedroom, where James slept peacefully, unaware of the journey that awaited them. As she lay beside her son, listening to his steady breathing, Sarah's mind filled with images of the day, blood on snow, Takeyomi's knife flashing in the morning light, the grim task of burying those who had tried to kill them. Yet amidst these dark thoughts, a strange sense of purpose had taken root. For months after Thomas's death, she had merely existed, going through the motions of survival. Now she felt truly alive again, even if that life was in peril. Tomorrow they would leave the only home James had ever known, venturing into an uncertain future with a man who moved between worlds. Sarah closed her eyes, praying for the strength to face whatever lay ahead. The journey east began in the hushed blue light before dawn. Frost clung to everything, transforming the landscape into a glittering wonderland that belied the dangers lurking within its beauty. Sarah helped James onto her sturdy mare penny, while Takeyomi secured the last of their supplies to the travois. "Remember, we must leave no clear trail," Takeyomi instructed, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "We will travel through the creek bed where possible. Water erases tracks." Sarah nodded, casting one last glance at the cabin. Would she ever see it again? The thought brought a lump to her throat, but she swallowed it down. Now was not the time for sentiment. "I'm ready," she said, mounting behind James. Takeyomi led the way on foot, his moccasins leaving minimal impressions in the snow. His keen eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert for any sign of pursuit or danger. They traveled in silence for the most part, speaking only when necessary. Even James seemed to understand the gravity of their situation, his usual chatter reduced to occasional whispered questions. By midday, the sun had climbed high enough to begin melting the top layer of snow, making their progress more difficult. Penny labored through the deepening slush, the travois creating more drag with each passing hour. Sarah could feel the mare's muscles straining beneath her. "We need to rest her," Sarah finally said as they reached a small clearing. "She won't make it otherwise." Takiom surveyed the area and nodded. "A short rest. We are making good time." They dismounted, and Sarah rubbed down Penny's legs while James stretched his own. The boy's face was pinched with cold, despite the heavy layers Sarah had bundled him in. "Are you warm enough?" she asked, adjusting his scarf. James nodded bravely. "I'm fine, Ma. When will we get to the cabin?" "Before nightfall, if we're fortunate," Takiom answered, offering the boy a strip of dried venison from his pouch. "Eat. Food warms the body from within." James accepted the offering eagerly, his initial wariness of Takiom having transformed into undisguised admiration. "Did you hunt this deer yourself?" "Yes, with that bow." Takiom nodded toward the weapon slung across his back. "Could you teach me to shoot a bow?" James asked, eyes wide with excitement. Before Takiom could respond, Sarah interjected. "James, that's not appropriate to ask." "Why not?" the boy persisted. "Pa was teaching me to shoot his rifle before he got sick." Takiom studied the boy thoughtfully. "Perhaps someday, if your mother permits it." The simple exchange highlighted the strange circumstance they found themselves in. Neither fully allies nor merely companions of convenience, but something undefined that shifted with each passing hour. Their rest was cut short by a distant sound that made Takiom stiffen. Sarah couldn't hear anything at first, then caught the faintest echo of what might have been voices carried on the wind. "Mount quickly," Takiom ordered, his tone brooking no argument. "We must move faster." Sarah didn't question him, helping James back onto Penny and mounting behind him in one fluid motion. Takiom took the mare's reins, leading them off their previous path and deeper into the forest where the trees grew close together. "Are they following us?" Sarah whispered, her heart pounding. "Perhaps, or hunters from the settlement. We cannot take chances." They pushed on through increasingly difficult terrain. Low-hanging branches whipped at their faces, and Penny struggled to navigate between the closely spaced trunks. The travois caught on roots and rocks, forcing them to stop repeatedly to free it. After one such delay, Takiom made a decision. "We must abandon some supplies." The horse tires too quickly. Sarah knew he was right, but choosing what to leave behind was agonizing. In the end, they kept only food, weapons, basic tools, and the thickest blankets. Everything else, cooking utensils, extra clothing, the few books she'd packed for James, was carefully hidden beneath a fallen log. "We can retrieve them later," Takiom assured her, seeing her distress. The lightened load allowed them to make better progress, but the sun was already beginning its descent toward the western horizon. The temperature dropped noticeably, and James began to shiver despite the warmth of Sarah's body behind him. "How much further?" Sarah asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "Not far. The valley lies just beyond that ridge." Takiom pointed toward a line of hills ahead. "But the approach is steep. We will need to lead the horse down carefully." As they neared the ridge, Takiom suddenly raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He crouched low, motioning for Sarah to dismount and do the same. "What is it?" she whispered, helping James down. "Smoke," Takiom replied grimly, pointing toward a thin gray line rising beyond the ridge. "Someone is at the cabin." Sarah's hopes plummeted. "Blackfoot?" "No. They would not light a fire so openly." Takiom's brow furrowed in concentration. "Stay here with your son. I will scout ahead." "Be careful," Sarah said, surprising herself with the depth of concern in her voice. Takiom acknowledged her words with a nod before disappearing silently into the underbrush. Sarah led Penny to a small hollow where they would be less visible, then sat with James on a fallen log, keeping the rifle across her lap. "Are we in danger again, Ma?" James asked, his small face serious. Sarah forced a reassuring smile. "I don't think so. Takiom is just being cautious. That's how he's survived so long in the wilderness." "He's brave," James declared. "Like Pa was." The comparison startled Sarah. but she couldn't deny there were similarities. Both men possessed a quiet strength, an unwavering sense of duty, a willingness to protect others at personal cost. "Yes," she agreed softly. "I suppose he is." They waited for what felt like hours but was likely only 30 minutes. The forest grew darker around them, shadows lengthening as the sun sank lower. James dozed against Sarah's side while she remained vigilant, jumping at every snapping twig or rustling leaf. When Takayom finally returned, he moved so quietly that Sarah didn't notice him until he was almost upon them. She raised the rifle instinctively before recognizing him. "It's safe," he announced. "The cabin is occupied by a trapper, an old man named McCready. I know him. He trades with both settlers and Indians fairly." Relief washed over Sarah. "Will he help us?" "He has agreed to shelter us for the night. Tomorrow he journeys to Pinecrest for supplies. He can carry word to your people about the Blackfoot threat." This news was better than Sarah had dared hope for. With Pinecrest warned, the settlement could send men to protect her homestead or help them reach safety elsewhere. The final leg of their journey passed quickly. The trapper's cabin came into view as they descended into the valley, a sturdy structure nestled against a rock face, nearly invisible until they were almost upon it. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney, promising warmth within. Samuel McCready greeted them at the door, a weathered man with a long gray beard and kind eyes, set deep in a face carved by decades of frontier life. He welcomed them inside without preamble, nodding respectfully to Takayom. "Any friend of the Comanche is welcome here," he said simply. "Got stew on the fire and plenty to share." The cabin's interior was cramped but tidy, filled with pelts, traps, and the accumulated oddities of a solitary life. McCready served them generous portions of rabbit stew in wooden bowls, watching with satisfaction as James eagerly devoured his portion. "Growing boy needs his strength," the old trapper observed, "especially after a journey like yours." As they ate, Takayom explained their situation in greater detail. McCready listened intently, asking few questions, but absorbing every word. "Blackfoot are getting bolder," he commented when Takayom finished. "Had a run-in with their scouts myself last autumn. Nearly lost my scalp." He rubbed his head ruefully. "I'll spread the word in Pinecrest. The Army Patrol might take interest too. They've been looking for an excuse to push the Blackfoot further north." Sarah felt a pang of guilt. "I don't want to start a war." "War's been brewing a long time, ma'am," McCready said gently. "Ain't you doing?" After the meal, McCready insisted Sarah and James take his bed, while he would sleep by the fire. Takayom, as before, declined to rest fully, positioning himself near the door. As Sarah tucked James in, the boy's drowsy voice reached up to her. "Are we safe now, Ma?" Sarah smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "Yes, love. We're safe. And Takayom, will he stay with us?" The innocent question gave Sarah pause. She glanced toward the Comanche warrior, who sat in quiet conversation with McCready across the room. What future could there possibly be that included him in their lives? Their worlds were too different, the barriers between them too great. "He has his own path to follow," she answered carefully. "But we'll always remember how he helped us." James seemed satisfied with this and soon drifted off to sleep. Sarah returned to the main room, where McCready was now snoring softly in his chair. Takayom stood by the window, gazing out at the night. "You should rest," he said without turning. "Tomorrow brings new decisions." Sarah moved to stand beside him. Outside, stars glittered in the clear sky, a sight so beautiful it almost made her forget the dangers that had driven them here. "What will you do now?" she asked quietly. Takayom considered before answering. "McCready has offered to guide me through the mountain pass. From there, I can travel south toward Crow territory. They are sometimes allies to my people." "So you're leaving," Sarah stated, surprised by the hollow feeling his words created. "The life debt is fulfilled," he replied. "You and your son are safe." Sarah wanted to argue that safety was fleeting, that the frontier was unforgiving to a widow and child alone. But pride kept her silent. She had survived without him before. She would do so again. "James will miss you," she said instead. Takayom turned to face her, his expression softening. He is strong like his mother. He will grow to be a good man. Because of his father's teachings, Sarah added. And yours, Takayom countered. You showed him courage these past days. Such lessons shape warriors and leaders. The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. They stood in silence for a moment, the space between them filled with words unsaid, possibilities unexplored. Finally, Sarah spoke. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything. Takayom reached out slowly, as if unsure of the gesture, and placed his hand briefly over hers where it rested on the windowsill. The touch was gentle but firm, an acknowledgement of connection that transcended the boundaries between their worlds. In another life, perhaps our paths would have crossed differently, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah understood his meaning all too well. In another world, another time, perhaps they could have explored the strange bond that had formed between them. But reality offered no such luxuries. Safe travels, Takayom, she said, withdrawing her hand. May you find your people again. He inclined his head in acknowledgement of both her words and the unspoken farewell they contained. As Sarah turned to join her son in sleep, she carried with her the certainty that while their journey together was ending, its impact would remain. She had lost a home but found the strength within herself she hadn't known existed. And perhaps that, more than anything, was what would see her through whatever lay ahead.